This Thursday, the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro offered the updated report of the COVID-19 figures in the Bolivarian nation.
There are 2 new cases that leave us a total of, as Vice President said, 333 cases. We have 142 recovered patients, 89 hospitalized, 68 in diagnostic centers, 24 in private clinics, and 10 deaths.
Likewise, President Maduro announced the arrival of a shipment of medical aid over the coming weeks following negotiations with the United Nations and the Pan-American Health Organization.
Today there was a meeting with the United Nations system and the World Health Organization. There was the Venezuelan president, the foreign minister and the health minister. A very important coordination meeting since the Pan-American Health Organization is coordinating various tons of humanitarian aid and health supplies that must arrive to Venezuela during the next weeks.
Also in Venezuela, it's been a year since the Venezuelan opposition sought to overthrow the government of President Nicolás Maduro in a coup. Its defeat reinforced the institutionality of the country. Let's find out more and remember this is what happened in Venezuela on the following story.
On April 30th, 2019, opposition politicians, along with a group of military personnel, attempted to carry out a coup which in less than 6 hours was extinguished, and which has since been catalogued as a new failure of this political sector. 1 year later, 7 out of 10 Venezuelans are against the toppling of President Nicolás Maduro, and his government has the support of 85% of citizens when it comes to leading the management of the pandemic, according to figures released by the pollster Hinterlaces.
The situation with the pandemic in the country has shown that the strategy of dual power, of the double presidency, has almost no meaning, no impact on reality, since it is not possible to attend to social needs through any other figure than the constitutionally elected one, or the one who is effectively in power.
In accordance with analysts, following those events of April 30th, the opposition was left fragmented, and the leaders of the uprising now face investigations and charges. Further, after the failed coup, negotiations began sponsored by Norway, and subsequently another round of negotiations by Barbados, and finally a national dialogue table between the government and sectors of the opposition, which continue today.
A division took place between sectors that promote violent, insurrectionary, armed solutions to the political conflict, and on the other hand, a more democratic opposition, which seeks a negotiated solution and dialogue.
The United States has openly machined a regime change strategy on Venezuela, but within just a year, the balance remains in favor of the policies of the Bolivarian Revolution. Foreign Minister Ariaza said this in a tweet.
Let's imagine that in 2019, the right-wing coup would have triumphed, a government that underestimates the pandemic, allied with Trump, Bolsonaro, Duque, expels Cuban doctors, eliminates club boxes and barrio adentro, rejects help from China, Russia, and the WHO, privatizes the integral diagnostic centers, and charges for the diagnostic test.
Since the COVID-19 emergency began, the main U.S.-backed opposition sector has not made a credible response in the eyes of citizens. That's in addition to their promotion of the economic problems generated by the blockade, which they themselves support.
The control of the territory, the leadership of the country, are in the hands of President Maduro, who is dealing with the pandemic firsthand. It is the national government with whom the humanitarian and international organizations communicate and have an understanding with.
According to the Hinterlaces survey, 81% of the population is in disagreement with the sanctions, and 78% believes that the efforts of the United States have been negative for the country. And even while being the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak, the White House has not halted its siege on Miraflores.
Moving on to Peru, COVID-19 death toll has surged to over 1,000 people with the virus, infecting more than 36,900 across the country. Local health authorities also reported a total number of infections of 36,976 in Lima and the Lambayeque region in the north of the country. As such, Peru has in the third worst hit country in total numbers of confirmed COVID-19 related deaths in Latin America, followed by Brazil, with more than 5,000 deaths, and Mexico with 1,737 deaths. The number of new infections also peaked in the last 24 hours with 3,045 new COVID-19 cases. And following the examples of Rio de Janeiro, Amazonas, and Sao Paulo, the Brazilian state of Pernambuco is set to extend its coronavirus restrictions according to a decree issued by Pernambuco State Governor Paulo Camarera. Stay-at-home guidelines will remain in force until at least May 15th. As of Wednesday, the northeastern state has confirmed over 6,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 500 deaths. Its hospital system has collapsed under the pressure. Meanwhile, Rio de Janeiro, which has been bankrupt since 2016 Olympics, is expected to be the next Brazilian city to see its hospital system collapse, as well as the risks posed to residents of its crowded, poorer neighborhoods. The world-famous Copacabana area has reported the highest number of coronavirus deaths in Rio. Time for a first break here from the south. Follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and on my account at Laura P. Telesur. We'll be right back with more news. We are back with our news. In Nicaragua, President Daniel Ortega criticized what considered the inaction of the UN in the face of the intensified coercive measures imposed by the United States on several countries in the world.
In this situation, by dictating sanctions against the people, sanctions that are aggressions because no international body has approved any sanctions. On the contrary, the United Nations is calling for the lifting of the blockade against Cuba year after year. The vast majority of the countries of the United Nations, with few exceptions, they have voted to lift the sanctions, but the tyranny of savage capitalism is allowed to continue.
The Nicaraguan president also ratified his solidarity with the people of Cuba in the face of the criminal blockade imposed 60 years ago by the United States.
And our solidarity this day with the people of Cuba, the people of Fidel, our solidarity with the government of Cuba, led by Comrade Miguel Díaz-Canel.
Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean is making headway in its fight against the novel coronavirus with no new cases in 4 days. Thus far, 116 people have tested positive and 72 others have recovered. 6 cases remain active while 8 people have died from the respiratory illness.
The total number of tests done to date, 1,683. Total number of unique patient tests, 1,376. Total number of repeated tests, 307. Total number of positive cases stands the same at 116. Total number of discharges, 72. Total number of deaths, thankfully, have remained the same at 8. 7 in Trinidad, 1 in Tobago. Total number of hospitalized patients has dropped from 9 to 6, and all 6 are in Cuba. There's no one in either the intensive care unit or the high dependency unit. No one is on a ventilator. All 6 are mild, asymptomatic patients, and we wish them the best going forward for their discharge.
Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced on Thursday the establishment of a cabinet-approved multi-sectoral task force to oversee the island's economic recovery from the novel coronavirus. As of Thursday, the Ministry of Health and Wellness had reported almost 400 confirmed cases and 7 deaths, while it also announced mass testing for antibodies developed by the population.
Over time, the testing protocol will have to be adjusted And so one of the things we're looking at now is antibody testing, and that will be introduced, particularly as you open up, which is a different type of testing to look now at the antibodies, which means the exposure level of the individual and by extension the population to the virus.
In an address to the nation, Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley advised the population that there will be a revision of the country's lockdown measures. The 24-hour stay-at-home order is to revert to an overnight curfew from Mondays as the government moves to a staged reopening of its offices and businesses.
I wish to stress that this initiative to ease restrictions is being guided by the best advice from our health professionals regarding infections on the island and other relevant data. Against this background, effective Monday, May the 4th, next Monday, the following will pertain. 1. Those government offices which have been functioning over the curfew period will continue to do so with their regular staff numbers. These include the General Post Office, the National Insurance Department, and the Customs and Excise Department and Immigration Departments. Other government entities which provide functions deemed critical at this time will recommence operations with regular staffing complements to provide full services.
Moving on, nearly 40,000 people have been infected by the coronavirus pandemic in Africa. On top of this, more than 1,600 have died of the virus, despite the fact the government remains least affected by the number of infections. The government of Comoros, a country that along with Lesotho had gone out on without presenting cases of infections, declared this Thursday the first case of coronavirus in the country. Among the other nations with the most recorded cases is South Africa with 5,647 cases, followed by Egypt with 5,537 and Morocco with 4,423 confirmed cases. In Sierra Leone, a riot in the Pademba Road prison left 7 people dead. As a result, there was a fire in prison and 2 guards and 5 inmates lost their life. Although authorities reported not knowing the cause of the riot, according to local media, this riot started after the Ministry of Justice was notified of a case of COVID-19 among the prisoners. Authorities have also said that after the case was discovered, they disinfected the facilities. Senegal's Ministry of Health reported 51 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday after more than 1,000 people were tested. According to Senegalese Health Minister Marie Kemese Ngon Ndiaye, 11 cases of local transmission were detected in Dakar, the capital, and at 2 more cities, whilst 19 patients were discharged from hospital this Thursday. The minister called on the population to respect the strict hygiene measures and to use face masks. Senegal ranks among the 5 worst-hit nations in Western Africa and 933 cases and 9 deaths. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization Regional Director for Africa, Matshidiso Moeti, has said that easing measures across the continent must be gradually implemented.
In balancing lives and livelihoods, countries are now looking at easing restrictions, and in doing so, we're encouraging countries to adjust measures slowly and in line with the evidence.
Likewise, Dr. Matshidiso Moeti offered a balance of COVID-19 figures in the African continent.
There are now more than 34,000 confirmed cases in Africa, and sadly, 1,500 lives have been lost.
And the WHO Regional Director for Europe, Hans Kluge, has made a call for countries to avoid worsening the health and economic crisis triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic.
We cannot allow this situation to worsen. We should do everything within our powers to prevent children becoming victims of this pandemic due to their vulnerability of vaccine-preventable diseases such as measles, diphtheria, mumps and rubella.
Kluge also expressed his concern about the interruption of immunization services for other diseases such as measles.
COVID-19 cannot be permitted to claim this collateral damage. We are concerned that countries may have seen interruptions in routine immunization services, including among vulnerable groups, and the interruption of measles outbreak response activities.
As Germany prepares to ease more coronavirus curbs, with museums, zoos, memorials and botanical gardens set to reopen, Chancellor Angela Merkel, Chief of Staff, said on Thursday that social distancing measures will certainly be extended until May 10th. Germany has seen more than 163,000 COVID-19 cases.
This virus is in our country. It will be in our country for months. That is why we have to live for months in this so-called new normality, where we have to make sure that the virus has a little chance as possible of spreading further. And that will continue to be the case as things stand at the moment, until we either have a vaccine that will give us the immunity we need when we are vaccinated and have a good vaccine, or when we have better medicines that will allow us to treat the infected better, faster.
Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin says he tested positive for COVID-19 and will self-isolate to protect other cabinet members.
I've just learned that I've tested positive for the novel coronavirus. Following orders from the Rostropnadzor, I have to be self-isolated and follow medical advice. It's necessary to ensure the safety of my colleagues. The government will continue its normal operations. I am planning to stay in touch with my colleagues and with you via telephone and video call on all general matters. Andrei Removich Belousov will act as Prime Minister.
He strongly condemned Israel's intention to annex part of the Palestinian territory in the West Bank, calling it a war crime. The bloc took the position after holding a meeting of foreign ministers convened by Palestine. At the meeting, the diplomats affirmed that they will support politically and financially the actions undertaken by the Palestinian authorities to stop Israel's claims and defend its territorial sovereignty. The multilateral organization also demanded that the United States respects United Nations resolution on the Middle East conflict and withdraw its support for Israeli claims. The Arab League called for a just solution to the conflict that would establish peace in the region. Authorities in Yemen have announced the two first deaths caused by the novel coronavirus. The government also informed of 5 new cases in the city of Aden, adding that one of the dead had not been tested for the virus. The Supreme National Emergency Committee for the Coronavirus also made a call for Yemenis to take preventative measures and avoid public gatherings.
2 cases died yesterday. The first case was tested positive after its death. According to the health officers of Aden, the other case died 2 days ago and the results came out positive yesterday. We called and are still calling the Yemenis to take preventative measures and stop the gatherings in public markets and attending Friday prayers during these exceptional circumstances.
In China, the Forbidden City in Beijing reopened on May 1st after 3 months of being closed due to the COVID-19 crisis. All tourist attractions were closed in China to halt the spread of the novel coronavirus since January. However, the country has started to normalize social and economic activities as there has been a marked decrease in cases and deaths. China's Forbidden City reopening is the latest signal that the country is keeping the disease under control. And police in the United States have found bodies stored in rented trucks at an overwhelmed New York funeral home on Wednesday after residents complained about the smell. Investigators found that the Brooklyn facility had rented 4 trucks to hide about 50 to 60 corpses on ice as funeral homes across New York State struggle to handle the number of COVID-19 deaths. At least 18,000 people have died in New York City since late March. The United States continues to be the nation worst hit by the coronavirus pandemic, with over 1,078,000 positive cases and more than 62,000 fatalities. Also in the United States, a dozen of protesters stormed the Michigan Capitol on Thursday, demanding to be let onto the House floor as lawmakers debated an extension to the governor's coronavirus emergency declaration. Many of the protesters were not wearing face covering despite the pandemic, and one demonstrator was arrested for assaulting another. Governor Whitmer had wanted lawmakers to extend the emergency declaration by 28 days as it expired late Thursday. As the protest continued, the Republican-led House refused to extend the state's coronavirus emergency declaration and voted to authorize a lawsuit challenging the governor's authority and actions to combat the pandemic. Like this, we come to the end of this news brief. Of course, you can find this and much other information on our website, telesurenglish.net, where you can read opinion articles, watch special interviews, and find much more material. And of course, keep yourselves updated related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, you can find the latest numbers related to COVID-19 in the worldwide and in the Latin American and the Caribbean region. The invitation is made for you to continue with Telesur, always together connecting our global thousands. Until next time, thank you for watching.